I want to move on now and bring in two guests on set here, Chinese Australians, who are going to talk to me about the way they feel pressure via the Chinese embassy and consulate in this country. I'm joined by Cindy Wren, who's with Shen Promotions, and also with Daniel Teng, who is on the commercial side of Epoch Times newspapers. Thanks both for joining us.
Thanks, Chris.
Cindy, you and I met at a function that was talking about the political dilemma at the moment with Australia and China. A lot of talk about foreign interference in Australia, a lot of talk about espionage in this country. And you were saying that through Shen Yun, you work privately as a business analyst, but you're involved with the Shen Yun Theatre and Falun Gong. And because of that, a lot of pressure comes to bear via the Chinese embassy to try and stop people having any dealings with you, to try and even block theatres from hosting your events.
Yes, even this year, after Shen Yun has been around for over 10 years, Chinese embassies still keep giving interference. For example, this year they make the phone call to the theatre and trying to give them the pressure. And in Perth, the theatre declined the application for Shen Yun to be hosted.
Yeah, now we don't want to go into details here and embarrass any theatre operators, but you've shown me the correspondence here and I heard the detail of this. And so you've gone to the theatres to try and book events. They would make money out of these events because you've got plenty of people who want to come along. But they get phone calls or correspondence from the Chinese embassy saying, please don't deal with these people.
That's right. And quite a few years ago, Chinese embassy also sent letters to Australian politicians to tell them, Shen Yun is here, please don't go to see the show. But in the end, many politicians end up in the theatre.
Good, so they resisted that pressure. I want to come back to Falun Gong in a moment, but I want to bring in Daniel here because at the Epoch Times, which is seen as a right-of-centre Chinese community newspaper, certainly is seen that way by the Beijing regime, you have similar situations where people from the embassies or the consulates put pressure on Chinese Australians not to be involved or advertise in your paper. And even with multinationals or big Australian companies, try and convince them not to advertise in your paper. Why?
Yeah, essentially our focus from our founding in the year 2000, was actually to take a very independent and impartial stance on reporting on China issues. Now, we were founded in reaction to major issues happening in China at the time, and there was a lot of media, you could almost call it propaganda. And at the time, the central government had something called the Central Propaganda Department. That was actually its name. And Epoch Times was really established to really tell the truth on what was going on in the country. But doing something like that has obviously drawn the ire of the Communist Party and also in different countries.
But this is direct interference in our country. If you've got advertisers who are being pressured by the embassy not to advertise with your company, this is the Chinese Communist regime using commercial or capitalist pressure points to try and put your newspaper out of business.
Yeah, so some incidents that we've run into over the years. So there was a lawyer based on the south side of Sydney. He advertised with the Epoch Times. And, well, we heard this from down the grapevine. He attended a party. Apparently he met with some certain officials or certain people of note in the Chinese community. And after that party, he came back and just said that he wanted to cancel his advertising with the Epoch Times and any association with our newspaper.
Yeah, that's a very worrying pressure. I want to come back to this idea of Falun Gong. You're involved in Falun Gong. You are as well, Daniel. Family practices. Some people call it a cult. It's not really a religion, it's a practice. There's meditation, but there's a community very focused on Falun Gong. We know the Beijing regime is very concerned about Falun Gong in its own country, just as they are concerned about other religions. But Falun Gong often protesting outside the Chinese embassy in Canberra and the like. Is this pressure felt by anybody else, though, more widespread in the Chinese Australian community, or is this something particular to try and shut down Falun Gong because the Chinese government sees that as a threat?
It's in the wider Chinese community. For example, take Shen Yun as an example. It's just really a music and dance performance.
But it's put on by Falun Gong, is it not? Shen Yun, the theatre, is tied to Falun Gong, isn't it?
Many artists, dancers and musicians, they themselves are Falun Gong practitioners.
But anyone can go.
Anyone can
and you get a lot of people from the broader Australian and Chinese Australian community.
Because it is about Chinese culture. So it doesn't mean that when Christian people run a business, you say this business is Christian, it's just a normal business. So these people, they are just talented musicians and dancers. So they run this show in the mission to revive the lost tradition and the Asian Chinese culture. So the pressure felt by the Chinese community is Chinese people, even though they are anxious to walk into the theater, to enjoy the music and dance, they are worried. Chinese embassy would not give them the visa to China to see their family.
They are worried that there'll be people in there who are informing on behalf of the Chinese embassy. This is it. This is what we're talking about with interference in Australia. This is happening in the here and now. Whatever you think of Falun Gong or those who might go to this theatre, they are worried that they'll be ticked, or their name will be then listed back at the Chinese embassy that they've had something to do with something that's got links to Falun Gong. Now, your own story, for instance, Cindy, you were born in mainland China. Would you go back to China now, or would you to visit family, or would you assume that there might be a black mark against your name because of your involvement with Falun Gong?
I would rather to be safe, rather to assume, because you never know what's going to happen. So this is how I understand the local Australian Chinese community. You don't have evidence, you don't know, but they just assume if they walk into the theatre, maybe. So this is people's natural perception to be safe.
Yeah,
so
I
feel very sad for Chinese people that we live in a free country. This is the country of democracy with freedom, and there are millions of audience around the world enjoy Shen Yun every single year. And Chinese people dare not to enjoy their own culture by this fear and the perception, which may not exist, I don't know. But just be cautious.
Daniel, your background is Chinese-Malaysian, but you're obviously deeply embedded in the Chinese-Australian community. What is that feeling like, living in, obviously, an open, free, democratic country? Is there a sense that you are being spied upon from within by your own country's embassy, by China's embassy?
I think we're always we're always quite careful, and I think it's already now at that point now where we know that whatever activities we do in the Epoch Times, or perhaps whatever Falun Gong practitioners do, that China will know about it. And I've personally had this experience myself where my father would go to China and he was actually involved in export and import business. And believe it or not, I'm not sure which city he traveled to, but one time he was in China, and he was actually approached by Chinese officials, and they spent a few hours questioning him about his activities locally. And mind you, he wasn't a figurehead. He merely assisted with certain activities, and so he was questioned about these issues. And they seemed to know a lot about what was going on, what he was doing. So
extraordinary. Let me show you something that was on the ABC earlier this week, and this is the deputy head of mission, the deputy head of the Chinese embassy in Canberra. His name is Wang Jining, and here's what he had to say about the democratic system, believe it or not, in China.
If possible, I would like to explain. People say Australia is a Western democracy and we are a party state. Actually, we see ourselves as a socialist democracy. A simplest comparison between Australian democracy and Chinese democracy will be like this. You have a voting democracy. We have a working democracy.
There you go. We've got a voting democracy. China has a working democracy. Does this make any sense?
Not particularly. What's the difference?
well, exactly. Well, he said, is there a working democracy in China?
Never heard about it, because there's no voting system.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, he's trying to say that there's a voting system. So tell us about your concerns about espionage. Some of this is open when you talk about pressure on theatres and pressure on advertisers. Do you worry about who might be informing within the Australian Chinese community, or do you just assume that the authorities will know everything that's going on?
I think it is an assumption, and myself, I'm very positive, because if you delve into the message and the virtue presented from Shen Yun, you get so inspired and so uplifted. Chinese culture is full of wisdom, virtue, love, and I felt like my personal experience, I'm a shy person, and by watching Shen Yun year on year, Shen Yun gave me so much strength, and I feel so honored and so appreciated to have the opportunity to be here talking with you, Chris.
You're not shy tonight, Cindy, so it's worked very well.
To share the beauty that I got inspired from Shen Yun, and what Shen Yun gives to people is so much love, that yes, you do have this perception that Communist Party is going to do something, but at the end of the day, they are human beings. They are no different from you and I, and communism is simply an idea. It's just a perception. It's what perception you take. So for what I got from Shen Yun is confidence, courage, bigger heart. And every year when I walk out the theater, I feel my heart is full of love. I'd like to share this love with everybody.
Rather than the fear and the suspicion. I just get a final word from you on this, Daniel. Is there a sense of suspicion within the Chinese-Australian community in current times about, just where people's loyalties might lie, what information might be passed on, or do you take it in your stride?
I think we take it in our stride, and I think most Chinese Australians are working hard on assimilating to Australian society more than anything. The topic does come up occasionally when it relates to maybe somebody with a partner in China or somebody with relationships in China, then that it might bring up a concern. But I like to re-emphasize really that Epoch Times, despite these issues that have happened commercially, at any one time for a Chinese newspaper in Sydney, we have over 100 advertisers or businesses working with us.
You're surviving. There's plenty putting their hand up.
There's plenty of people reading the paper and plenty of businesses supporting the paper as well.
I really appreciate you joining us, Daniel and Cindy. I appreciate your courage in speaking about these issues. I think it's good for us all to understand what's going on this front.